Okay. Got to adjust the the beautifully made camera here. Okay. All right. In an attempt to stay on time today, no fooling around. There will be no fun. Jeez. If we're not having any fun, we have to have tea. Goodness gracious. All right. Today, I'm changing things up a bit. We're going to talk about comics. Watchmen! Let's hear it for Watchmen. This book continues to appear on best of lists some 35 years after its publication. Wow. It was released as a series of 12 comics, and that there's a lot in that, and each one of them had this bar with this, and this is the original. Everything about Watchmen is like this was the original. Everybody's trying to get in on the ground floor. What was it originally? It's like. Originally, it was a comic which was mass-produced for everybody, and it was available affordably, and there wasn't anything unique or in the sense of, there wasn't anything produced for the how do they call that market? Not the vintage market, but the one-of-a-kind market is, there's no aura around this object. It's just really well written and beautifully done, and beautifully organized and beautifully drawn, and in every way, it is one of the most comprehensively done pieces of design that we have ever seen. It's probably equaled in give or take by The Dark Knight Returns, the Frank Miller, Klaus Janson, Len Varley reboot of which began basically all the Dark Knight stuff that we had because of that book, and Mouse by Art Spiegelman, the 2-volume book about Spiegelman and his father's relationship and his father's history, his father's history basically as a survivor, both before and then in the death camp, before going to the death camps, and then in the death camps, and getting out of the death camps. And it's a very complex book. Those 3 books are probably the most comprehensively designed in that everything about them has been designed. This book was so completely thought out. You could argue there are no accidents, but of course there are. Accidents do happen, but anyway. So this was the first cover of the first comic was this one, which turns out to be a close-up, basically, and more uses comics the way that film is used. And you'll see here the clock, which is the 10 to 12, which people of my generation recognized immediately as being the doomsday clock, which is maintained by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists shortly after World War II, when the America and Russia got into, or Soviet Union, pardon me, got into the arms race. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists began to set a clock, and each year they would position the hands of the clock relatively close to midnight, depending on geopolitics. So my memory is that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was 3 minutes to midnight, or 2 minutes to midnight. The most it ever can be is quarter to midnight. So in other words, the clock is always on. So the 12th, because this is 12 issues, which is standard for a limited run, a year, in other words, like 1 issue per month. So here's, and then at the beginning, as you can imagine, at the beginning of the second issue, actually they don't. Yeah, that's right. That's something they don't change. The clocks. No, they do change. They do change. It's very, very. Yeah, you can't really see here any particular difference. And then, but when we get to the, yeah, so here's the 12th issue, right? And it's nearly midnight. Or sorry, 11th issue. It's 1 minute to midnight, and then it's midnight. At midnight, all the angels and their superhuman crew. And then, just to hammer this home, the back cover was this, and we were like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But then, every month was a surprise with this book. Here was the second back cover. So the back cover for the second issue shows the blood dripping down, and you can imagine. So by the time you get to this would be issue 4, I think. This is what it looks like. You can see it's going to go bad. And I thought it was going to be completely covered, but no, this is issue 12. You can see the clock's at midnight, and it's not quite covered. So I guess they decided that would be too, too grim. I'm not sure what. And so each image that they choose needs the context. I mean, this is a beautiful image, and there's a chapter 2, but it was just Watchmen 2. Okay. So before I get into when I get going on the, it's like, oh, well, this is how the book is made. It's like, that sort of can go on forever. So before we get into that, it's like, well, what's it about? So basically, it's a mystery story. It's a murder mystery initially, about a group of superheroes who are mostly normal, regular people, with a few exceptions. And they are in the present moment, which is, I think it's actually 1985. In other words, it was set in the day. Not my memory is it's 1985. Yeah, that's right. It's 1985. One of the heroes, the comedian, has been killed, has been assassinated, or has been murdered. And so it starts off as who killed the comedian. And so this group of superheroes included the comedian, Night Owl, Silk Spectre, no, sorry, yeah, that's right. I can never remember. I think it's Silk Spectre, because she and her mother. Anyway, I don't find that character well developed, particularly. And Laurie as a character is well developed, but her particular hero is like, you never really. She just seems to be a gal who dresses up in short clothes. Anyway, Night Owl, Dr. Manhattan, who is sort of the, like, what if the Hulk was real kind of thing. Sort of. That's not really fair. There's like a Dr. Atomic, this sort of there's always a character like this. So anyway, Dr. Manhattan, the comedian, I can imagine people at home going crazy. It's like, I missed him, and this, and this. Rorschach. Those are the main characters you're going to see. And they are a second group of heroes who have succeeded a first group, which included Hooded Justice, the first Night Owl, Sally Jupiter, who was Laurie's mother. So the first Silk Spectre, I guess it is. Again, I can't remember what her name is. There was no Dr. Manhattan before. So this first group of heroes. And basically they get together to correct evils and right wrong and so on. So it's the usual sort of thing. but they're all people. They're all regular people. They don't actually have any superpowers. They're just sort of prepared to use violence, and they all sort of like, they're all kind of like a bunch of Batmans. They don't really have. These are old characters that were developed by Charlton Comics, and then were purchased as properties by DC. And Alan Moore, who is responsible for a massive amount of work in changing comics, changing the way we looked at comics and what we thought about comics. And he's just a brilliant guy. I mean, he's done a lot of stuff, which means he's done a lot of. There have been a lot of lumps. He's, and not everything that he touches is amazing. But he has changed the way we look at comics, and there's no going back, and that's great. That's a great thing, I think. Not sure what I mean by there's no going back. I mean, in the sense that comics will always be. There is a demand for comics that essentially suit boys mostly between the ages of, say, 8 and 30 or 50 or 80, which are, as we talk about them, as male power fantasies. And that market is thriving. But it used to be the only market. It used to be the only game in town. And now it isn't the only game in town. And that's a great relief. And a lot of that is because of Alan Moore. Okay. I know people will hate on me for that. No, okay, fine. That's fine. Oh, Ozymandias. Jeez. I'm so sorry. Oh, people who are Ozymandias fans. I can't imagine how you'd be an Ozymandias fan. But anyway, okay. So it's a murder mystery. So the comedian is tossed out the window and killed. Well, who killed him? And so the Watchmen, who have formed this group, begin to assemble very slowly and come out of retirement because they've retired and find out, it's like, okay, what happened? And the person who's really pushing the investigation is Rorschach, who is, as far as I'm concerned, the most compelling character. And I think you're supposed to be compelled by Rorschach. He's apparently a sociopath. It's really not. He's not a sociopath because he feels things, but he is not a well individual. And the main characters are going to be Ozymandias, who is supposed to be the smartest man in the world, who has voluntarily retired. And Rorschach, Night Owl, whose name is Dan Driver, because they all have their different identities. Silk Spectre, the comedian who you see in flashbacks, and Dr. Manhattan. So these are sort of the main characters, and they're the most interesting characters. The rest of them are sort of... And then there are some underworld figures. So basically, it looks as though... So initially, so who killed the comedian? And as they begin to unravel that, and they begin to figure out what happened, what is... It looks as though somebody is killing costume heroes. There has been the Keene Act. So in this environment, in this world, Nixon is reelected and reelected and reelected. And this is something which in the 80s, a number of people were interested in. Frank Miller saw the same thing. Nixon is considered by Moore to be sort of the quintessence of evil, basically. And that's legit. I mean, in the sense that for Moore and his generation, Nixon was a war criminal who presided over Vietnam and the Holocaust or genocide in Cambodia, which was triggered by the genocidal bombing of the Cambodian border and the Khmer people, which was just considered to be a sideshow, famously. So there's a lot of reasons why Nixon and Kissinger are considered to be villains like this. Kissinger still can't go to various different. It's amazing this guy's still alive. Kissinger still can't go to various different parts of the world because he's been classified as a war criminal. And if he lands in, I can't remember. It's like it's not sort of. It's like I think if he goes to France or Italy, he can be arrested and he'd be taken to the World Court. And I was like, that would be great. Anyway, but no, that's not going to happen because he's too smart. Kissinger is smart, cunning, as they say. What is it? Agamemnon is wise, but Odysseus is cunning. Yeah. Anyway, so basically and then Dr. Manhattan, somebody leaks a news story that Dr. Manhattan is causing cancer, and that means that his young partner will presumably have Laurie will also have cancer. So the costume heroes are having dirt thrown on them. They've all retired voluntarily because of the Keene Act, which is coming, basically, which makes costume superheroes illegal. So this sort of discussion, as Moore often has, between what is the legitimate use of power. The book which comes before this, and then he finished after it, because he didn't at the time. I don't know the history of the deep history of V for Vendetta. Is V for Vendetta, which they did make a movie, the Wachowski siblings, sisters now. They weren't sisters then. Anyway, the Sibs made quite a good movie of V for Vendetta. It was true to the text. I think that the comic is actually better than the film because the comic completely involves you and it takes time. It takes longer to read the comic. This is one of the slowest reading superhero comics you're going to read. I used to give it to to a number of classes, and people would say, "Oh, great comics." I'll be like, "Yeah, you can start reading it now because it's going to take you, a few weeks to read that." And people are like, "Yeah, whatever. Okay, Blackhorn, go on with your crazy self." And then they try to read it the night before, and I'd say, "So, how many people got into Watchmen?" They'd be like, "Hands would go up." I think, I'd say, "How many people read Watchmen?" No hands. I'd say, "How many people got like one or two chapters of Watchmen?" Oh yeah, everybody got a couple. So what happened there? People are like, "Oh, it took a long time." I'm like, "Yeah, I know. It's slow. You have to take your time to read this comic." So basically, in the course of figuring out who's been killing the superheroes, we begin to uncover the plot by Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias, who has become he has become a world power on his own, who is a sort of panoptic force. He sees all, knows all, and is apparently does genetic manipulation. I mean, he's a Superman basically. So Veidt is Superman, Rorschach is sort of Batman. Dryburgh is kind of, but that's the Night Owl as this character from Charlton Comics. So there's a sort of similarity. Most figures are versions of other figures. There's always a strong man. There's always and so on. Authority is actually a nice comic for that. By Warren Ellis. I like Ellis as a writer. He does some funny stuff. And Transmetropolitan is like, what if Hunter Thompson, in his better moments, because Hunter Thompson could be not that together. He extended to anyway. What if Hunter Thompson wrote sort of funny comics, which actually had a plot? So Hunter Thompson couldn't have done that. Anyway, I suppose he could have if he wanted to. So that's the story. And Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias, seems to be putting together a plan to unite the world. And this is going to involve some kind of disaster. It's not clear what. And I won't say any more than that because it's a mystery and you have to read it. And it's a compelling mystery, and you want to know. It's like, what's going to happen? And so on the course of this, you find out about what happened when they were young, basically superheroes or costumed heroes, why they stopped, what they did various differently, because they worked together. Like, for instance, Rorschach and Dryburgh, Night Owl worked together. Dr. Manhattan and Laurie Zbyszek take up together. Why? How did that happen? Who is Dr. Manhattan? And so on. Who was Adrian Veidt? So you sort of get a picture of each one of these characters. So each one of the issues of the comic, which is really only 24 pages because of the way the book is made, which I'm going to talk about, is a sort of portrait of, except for the two books about Rorschach, which are probably two of the best, most compelling issues of comics I have ever read. They are just so... The hair stands up on the back of your neck when you read these things. It's just this perfect portrait of this guy who is, as I say, appears to be a sociopathic, but... And Moore went on and took that, I think, that interest, and he writes From Hell, which is a big phone book. Unfortunately, the art done by Eddie Campbell, and I Pache, fans of Eddie Campbell, I cannot tolerate this style. I mean, I read the book because it was so well written, but the art is just grotesque. Anyway, and not grotesque in a good way. I mean, if it's grotesque art, you're like, ugh, it's like, that's great. That's great. That's how I think about Bilal. The most recent Bilal for the last, 15, 20 years has been bizarre, grotesque, but it's beautiful. It's just, anyway, shut up, Tim. We're not having any fun here. Just keep with the plan. What was I talking about? The two issues of Rorschach. Probably the most perfect issue of comics. Certainly an argument for one of the most perfect issues of comics is issue number 4, chapter 4, which is the portrait of Dr. Manhattan. And it is one of the most perfectly designed comics I have ever read. It just is so beautifully made, and it's so well organized and thought out. It's so clever without being overly clever. Without pointing to itself and going, ha ha, am I not great? Am I not entertaining? It's like a version of Gladiator. Am I not entertaining? So as I begin to talk about the design of it, I want you to remember that Moore has actually taken his name off the book because DC has gone on. DC Warner, now, who is it now owns DC? Well, it's not Disney. It's one of the things they don't own. But DC has been owned by Time Warner for quite a while, and I think Bertelsmann bought Time Warner. I can't remember. Anyway, one of the 5 media companies in the world that are left, soon to be 1, soon to be 2, I guess. Disney and not. Moore was so offended by the way that they handled Watchmen that he had his name taken off the book, which is I can't really. It's so boggling to my mind to take your name off. What is clearly a masterpiece is just astonishing. I mean, Moore is a very remarkable guy, and to take your name off a project like that is class defining. Defines the whole genre. Oh man, unbelievable! But he wanted Dave Gibbons, who was the artist, to go on getting money because Moore is a famous guy. Dave Gibbons, not so much. I mean, I think that Gibbons is a really, really fine artist. He's an excellent artist, but he's a working artist, so he's not going to make millions and billions of dollars. So this very, very careful style here with his, Gibbons was trained my memory is that he was trained as an architect or an engineering draftsman, something like that, or an architectural draftsman, something like that. So he has this extremely precise way of drawing, and things are very real. And then the book was colored. I think the coloring is it's just become part of the book. It's not what I would do, but anyway. So, like, for instance, here's an example of. So this is the comedian who's talking to Rorschach. So here's Rorschach, who has this mask. And if you're familiar with the ink blots which were named by a guy named Rorschach, that he developed a series of ink blots to show. This, I think they were developed specifically to determine the criminally insane. And it's a typical thing where you show somebody an ink blot and they say, "Oh, that's it," and you say, "What is this? What does this look like?" And the person says, "That's a bunch of pretty flowers." And they're ink blots. So you make a blot, you put ink down on one side, you fold the paper in half, and then you open it up, right? So it's symmetrical, but apparently random. Well, they're not random. I mean, the cards. I don't think they use these anymore at all. It's one of these weird. But anyway, there's a funny story, or just a joke about this, where the doctor shows the patient the first Rorschach test blot, and the patient says, "Oh, that's two people making love." And some of them do look like that. I mean, some do look like people copulating. I mean, basically, obviously, it's whatever's in your head is what you're going to project on these things, and that's how the doctor's going to read. So the doctor's like, "Okay, fine." So he puts the card down. He says, "And the next card," and the guy goes, "Looks like two people screwing." And he's like, "Oh, okay." So he puts the next, and then he says, "Okay, what do you think of the third one?" He's like, "That's two people having sex." He's like, "Okay." So he puts the third, and he gets to the fourth card. He says, "What do you think of this?" He's like, "Yeah, it's two people making love." He's like, so the doctor says, "Mr. Jones, you seem to be fixated on everything for you is sex." And Jones says to the doctor, "Well, Doc, I can't help it. You keep showing me dirty pictures." It's not even any funny anymore. Anyway, so for instance, in this scene, we have the comedian here's the comedian who's basically looks like he's about to be killed, being interviewed by Rorschach. They're in the hotel room. So right outside the hotel room is a neon sign. So the neon sign is off, it's on, it's off, it's it's off. Oh man, it's so smart. And then in this final panel, of course, it's truth and justice. And we're back in the real world. So here we are. We've had the interview, and now in this last panel, the ninth panel, we're back in the world, and here is Rorschach, who is grabbing a hold of one of the older guys that he's trying to find out. Did you do this? Did you kill him? Okay. So we don't find out who Rorschach is, who his alter ego is, until the middle of the book. And okay. So the book is, when I say the book is wholly designed, I mean, okay, not only is there this stuff about this, the clock in the back and so on, but also inside the cover, it actually spells out Watchmen. So that's Watchmen. So each issue had the beginning of WATC, and then it moved across Watchmen. So they planned that too. At the back of each book, and this I think was the least interesting for me, there is essentially the file on the character. So you can find out, in some cases it's a biography that the person's written. In this case it's Under the Hood, which is about Hood of Justice. And so it's actually the material so Moore generated the backstory. This is partly what makes the book so strong, is that there's this, each character genuinely has a backstory. And Moore is extremely thorough about that. The problem is that it's not that interesting for me. So when I read the comics now, I don't think I've reread those sections. There's basically the background to how people met, and and then there are examples from the New Frontiersman. So this is the sort of libertarian paper that Rorschach always buys from the newsstand. The newsstand functions as a very important place. So there are a series of narratives within narratives, and this is why the book is considered to be, is it postmodern? I mean, people say yes. I don't know. Again, it's like, is that going to be a helpful discussion to have? But there's a counter narrative. There's a parallel narrative inside the book, which is Tales of the Black Freighter. So there's a comic book inside the comic, which is a commentary on the comic. And it's being read by a young African-American boy sitting at a hydrant. Well, it's not actually a hydrant, it's a charging post for electric cars. And they're warm, so he sits up against it. And he reads the Tales of the Black Freighter. And as he reads the Tales of the Black Freighter, we read the Tales of the Black Freighter too. So there's this other story within the story. To give you an idea, so Dr. Manhattan is this sort of, as I say, sort of cross between the Hulk and Mr. Atomic or Mr. A. And he actually controls time and space. Well, or does he? So he actually can be in a number of places at the same time. So here, and it's actually one of the few comics that actually show lovemaking, like not sex, but actual lovemaking. So here, Laurie is making love with John, and he's also, and it turns out that she's like, oh my God, there's two of them, because he can duplicate himself. And while she's doing that, he's heating, he's heating the water by just puts his finger in it and just heats it up. Just, excites the molecules. And then he's also working out in the lab, and that's it for her. She's like, oh, because he's not in any one place at any one time, because all times and all places exist simultaneously, and so on. And this is the fundamental sort of point about this character. So he goes to Mars. He's driven off to Mars. And so this is the chapter 4 that I'm talking about, which happens on Mars, which for whatever reason in the colorist decision was to make the planet pink. I really am okay. As I say, not my palette. But you get used to it. I mean, after 35 years, we sort of gotten used to this is the way Watchmen looks. And so in this, so they use this 9-panel grid. The 9-panel grid, or any grid system like this, is a way of organizing a lot of information on a page. If you want to make bigger units, you can join together, say, 2 blocks and have 8 panels on the page. But you're still working on a grid system which is 3x3, basically. So this is a very old-fashioned grid system. And when Moore locked himself into this system, people were like, I think a lot of us looked at it and were like, Jesus, like we haven't seen this since Steve Ditko or, Jack Kirby. So he deliberately stepped back into this, and he really makes it work. So that, so you'll get, for instance, here, this is an interesting, well, all the pages are interesting. So here you can see, so Laurie, there we go. So here are 3, it's still a 9-panel grid. You can see 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You can see they're units, basically, you make up, it's like Lego, basically. You make units of however many you want, based on this basic unit. This is 1, right? So it has beats. It's like beat, 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 slow, slow, slow. And then when you pull back, you see that the whole thing is one scene. So it's one scene with them talking here, talking here, talking here. So you can have a landscape, essentially. And then you can also break it up and indicate that things are happening. That there's a scene is very filmic, right? And at the same time, there are these short, quick panels down at the bottom, which indicate that it's moving along. Right? So you can see basically one of the issues about a comic is how fast does it move? How long does it take to be on a page? And this is really well done in Miller's Dark Knight, where at one point the Dark Knight has been buried because he's supposed to be dead. And his heart starts because that's the plan. It's part of the plan. It's for him to be dead. And there's nothing, and then you see a heartbeat, and then Robin looks up at Superman, and Superman looks down at her, and there's a heartbeat. So we can tell how long the page takes, 3 heartbeats. And so this idea of introducing timing into the narrative, where it isn't just sort of all action all the time, but things happen at different paces at different times, is very unusual. And it's something that Japanese actually have been doing for, oh my God, like, if there's a graphic medium that Americans or North Americans or Westerners use, the Japanese got there first. It is a country, as Roland Barthes called it, an empire of signs, and they are the masters of signs. Anyway, so there's this kind of thing, which. So when we have Dr. Manhattan, so here he is. So here he is on Mars, and he's looking at a photograph. He lets the photograph drop. He's looking at the photograph still. Now he's back in the past. Now he's looking at a photograph. He's still holding the photograph. Then he lets it drop. He's walking away. And he says, in the photograph is in my hand. They were in an amusement park in 1959. In 12 seconds' time, I dropped this photograph to the sand under my feet and walk away. It's already lying there 12 seconds into the future, 10 seconds now. The photograph, so it took 2 seconds, right, to go through that. The photograph is in my hand. I found it in a derelict bar at Gila Flats 27 hours ago. I'm about to drop the photograph, 7 seconds now. And then he drops the photograph. And so everything in this book, in this which is Watchmaker, happens in this way, so that he knows what's going to happen, and he does it anyway, right? Because this is the struggle between the worlds of predestination and free will, which, of course, Einstein was particularly focused on. And Einstein, as you remember, came from a watchmaking household, and so we have here basically a theoretical physicist who starts off as a watchmaker. And he's a watchmaker, right? And Moore always puts a quotation in at the very end of the book. So if you want to know sort of like what's the epigraph, you go to the very end of the book, the very end of the chapter, and there's the epigraph there. The release of atom power has changed everything except our way of thinking. The solution to this problem lies in the heart of mankind. If only I had known, I should have become a watchmaker. Albert Einstein, right? And so these are actual real things. And so when he does the chapter on Ozymandias, he quotes from Shelley, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. So you'll get, and a lot of it, he quotes from Dylan. It starts off with At Midnight All the Angels, which is Desolation Row. What is it? At Midnight All the Angels and Their Superhuman Crew. At midnight, all the agents, at midnight, all the agents and their superhuman crew go out and round up everyone who knows more than they do. Oh, yeah. Whew. So, basically we then get the picture of John, who starts off as this guy here, and the father, who is the watchmaker, he says, that's it. It's over. Once he sees the bomb, he's like, no. Watches are finished. It's all atomic power now. And so he takes he's laying out the gears of the watch, and he picks it up, and he throws them off the balcony. And he says, you've got to learn physics. And then, so there they go. And it's just, the drawing is so gorgeous. The line art is just so particular. And this looks something like the clear line style, which I was talking about, weeks ago. But it isn't really. I mean, it's clear line style. Lean Claire is really, this doesn't look like Tintin. I mean, it's just not. It's just a very different style. So then we get his story, and we find out what happens to him, where he gets caught in this sort of nuclear event, and he disappears in time. And then he begins to reappear, and he slowly manifests himself until you get this, he manifests himself basically as the Son of God, or as God, And he begins to be the superpower. And he then agrees to go to Vietnam, and that's why America wins the war in Vietnam, because basically he he just makes it happen. And so there's this one panel of him in Vietnam. And there he is at this point still wearing this sort of jockstrap, which he eventually takes off. And it's again one of the few times in comics where you see full frontal male nudity. It's like, well, is this such a big deal? Well, it was a huge big deal in 1985, 86. It was like, oh, people were like, oh my God, a penis. Oh my God. Like we'd never seen them before. So that's an amazing book. And then we get into Rorschach's story. And Rorschach's story is a beautiful example of, so here's the cover of the first Rorschach. So it's, of course, everything is reflected. And the thing about this comic, as I say, when I talk about design, I mean it's design. So if you go to the center of the Rorschach chapter, of course it's Fearful Symmetry, which is Blake, right? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. What immortal hand or eye could frame my fearful symmetry, right? So fearful symmetry is the tiger's mask, the lines on both sides of the head, which appear to be symmetrical, but we know aren't quite symmetrical. If we look at the very center of that issue, now because there are 12 issues, there actually isn't a center to the book. And I wonder how many times Moore thought about having 13 issues. Like I might have, if I had been designing, I would have thought, let's have 13, because it would be very unusual to have 13. But anyway, they didn't. So issue 5, or chapter 5, is effectively the center of the book. But there are these two books about Rorschach, book 5 and book 6, or chapter 5 and chapter 6, so that he is at the center of the book. Right? At the center of issue 5, you'll see that there is this one panel of Adrian Veidt as Ozymandias beating up, I can't remember who he's beating up. Somebody's going to, I think he's beating up somebody who's trying to assassinate them. And you'll see that the panels mirror each other. So we've got this one center panel, and Moore and Gibbons do this very rarely. And then 1 and 1, so that is 2 units together horizontally, 2 units, 2, 2. If we then go to this spread, you'll see that it's 2 pages of 9 panels each. And if we go to the spread before, you'll see it's 2 pages of 9 panels each. It's like, well, so what? But then if we go to this page before that, we'll see a 9-panel page and a page with this one major panel in the center. And if we go to the page after, we'll see that it's 1 main panel, 9 grid. So the whole book is symmetrical if you keep on going further out until the very first page mirrors the very last page. So 1 and 22, 2 and 21, 3 and 20, etc. It's a smart book. But it's also, and again with this timing issue, like here, for instance, is Rorschach's foot. Here he's about to step in. There his foot is over the puddle. Then he steps in it. We know how long this takes because it's the light, the neon light is on, it's off, it's on, right? And when he steps in the puddle, basically there's this explosion, apparently. It's just water, but it looks like an explosion. And so we know that the timing of this strip is 1 step. Right, that's it. So it's really, really smart, and you can get. And Rorschach has this creepy looking voice. He has this. The word balloons are notched. He also keeps a journal, and ultimately, Rorschach is revealed, and you have to sort of come to terms with who he is and what he is and how he got there and so on. So people will say, it's variously a success or not a success. The thing is, it's a really good story. And sometimes people say, well, I'll watch the film before I read the book. It's like, please don't. Please do it the other way around. Okay? Read this. And then if you want to watch the movie, okay. But, they did a massive disservice to the movie. Zack Snyder directed the movie, and The texture of it's wrong. It's just too short. I mean, I think it needed to be 3 movies. I mean, at the time they weren't really doing that yet, and they'd just done that for Lord of the Rings. But this issue of sort of taking a trilogy and turning it into a quadrilogy, a pentalogy, by say splitting the last movie, which they did with the Hunger Games, when they began to realize they were going to run out of. They were like, hey, people are still buying tickets for this thing. Okay, well, we'll take that last movie in the trilogy and we'll split it into 2. And maybe actually we'll split it into 3. Or we'll take The Hobbit, and make 3 films out of one little book. Whereas with The Lord of the Rings, they easily could have made, 6 movies out of it. And I think probably people would have gone on seeing it. So the film is, yeah, so I don't recommend seeing the film. First, I do recommend this. I have to say, to give you an idea of how complex the planning is, I brought out the big guns. DC, some years ago, began doing these absolute editions. So I have no idea why they decided to pair with vodka, but anyway. So they made these really nice boxed editions. This is what it looks like. This is the back, right? So, and they're beautiful books. I mean, they've done one on V for Vendetta. They've done Dark Knight. They've done a Ronin. They've done since then. There isn't any major comic that hasn't been done like this. So they do it large, and it's printed well, so you can see it clearly. So here you can really see what's going on. And this front page is like, so here we are right down in the gutter with what's supposed to be blood. Again, this is for me a coloring issue. And then we're pulling back up from the smiley face with the blood on it, which becomes a reappearing meme, basically. And then we're pulling up and pulling up and pulling up and pulling up and pulling up until finally we get to the top where Dreiberg is saying, that's quite a view. That's what he's saying. That's quite a drop, yeah. So the book is printed on clear white paper as opposed to newsprint or Mando paper, which was a even better stock at the time. And so you can see how much the art improves. It's just vivid and beautifully done. Okay, so you can be like, okay, now that's probably much more what the flats looked like when they were printing. And then at the end of it, and this is really sort of part of why you come for one of these editions. Are some of Moore's working notes, and these were printed in a very rare now edition of the first sort of working process. So here are Moore's notes. So these are his notes to Dave Gibbons. So Moore writes a script like this, and then he sends this in the day. He would send the script to Gibbons. Remember, there's no email at this point. There's the phone. Both Moore and Gibbons are British. And then Gibbons is color coding what is description, what is dialogue, what is action, which is what many artists have to do. Right? So there's actual process, and you see Gibbons' work. I'm frankly surprised that they haven't actually produced just the whole. So here's Gibbons. Here are Gibbons' roughs, quote unquote. I mean, they're hardly rough at all, but this is a typical sort of thumbnail process that an artist would go to, where you do the page in small so you can see how the page works. You can do what's called spotting the blacks or black spotting, where you place the dark and light areas on the page so there's a pattern to them. Otherwise, so the page isn't fighting with itself. So there's a lot of design in this thing. Anyway, I cannot highly recommend this enough. It's a murder mystery. It's well written. It's a comment about human beings, place in space and time. It's about It's about war. It's about corrupt governments. It's about human connections. One of the most touching stories, really, is the story between the news vendor who sells Rorschach his paper every day, or not quite every day, and the boy who's reading the pirate comic. Because they start off, the news vendor seems to be sort of racist, maybe. He's angry with the boy because the boy's not buying the book because the boy is there. And he lets the boy read the book, and it's one of those old things about what are you going to do if a kid comes in and wants to read comics in the store? Are they going to buy it? Do you let them read? This used to be a big issue. I suppose it is, and still in some places. But children will always want more than they can afford. Well, that's probably everybody. Well, a lot of people anyway. So the news vendor has this very touching relationship with the boy, where he's cranky with him, and he's gruff and sort of snarly, but he lets him read anyway. And he talks to him, and he sort of vents his. So you get his point of view too, literally the man in the street. It's an amazing book. You'll find it, I think, very, very interesting. They've done, DC has marketed the bejesus out of it. They've produced another, I don't know, dozens and dozens of books after it, which go back and look at, like stories from Watchmen, basically. Don't look at that stuff first. Maybe not at all. It's just a big company trying to, make money, basically, which is why Moore had his name taken off all the Watchmen material. And he won't even talk about it. He says, no, that's not my work anymore. But he did make sure that Gibbons has his name on it, so that every time they use Watchmen, they have to say Dave Gibbons Watchmen, and Gibbons gets a piece of it. It's a very generous, enormously generous thing to do in any field, I think. So that's a good book for today, and I stand by that. Well, I sit by it.